Hello, here's a DVD director's commentary of the making of Easy Being a Winner. I'm Dan from Silverbacks. Each morning, members of the band would get into Dublin from neighbouring towns. We all kind of live in towns dotted around the outskirts of Dublin. Cian and I would get the train from Drogheda. I was over from Paris for the recording period. And we'd all arrive at the same time at this beautiful studio, Sonic Studios, in Dublin. Dublin because it's convenient for us based on where we live. The studio because it's kind of Dan Fox's, our producer's headquarters, and we've grown quite attached to it. And there's a lot of fantastic equipment in here that's very suited to our music and music style. You get a glimpse of the inside of the studio, some beautiful lime green soundproofing. And here's me usually talking shite, especially if Patter's in the room, because it's great getting him to laugh. Another great part of this studio is that there's seagulls that come to a door and say hello. And we have little bits of bird feed that we can give them, seeds. And they seem to dig the music, which is great as well. It's good to have someone that you can soundboard music off. We all start with the drum parts. Here's Gary, tune the drums.
Tell the camera what you're doing, Gary. What's that thing that you're doing now?
Tuning.
Tuning. Cool. You might want to tune that tom man sound a bit.
We got it right. We got it right in the end. So we all start with recording the drums first, and I think like most people. And I think there's two tracks that play to a metronome, and they're kind of drum parts loops. It's Hideaway, Something I Know. But apart from that, most of the recordings, it's live drums. Gary plays along to a guide vocal, bass, and guitar. You'll notice that on bass, it wasn't Emma. Emma did play bass on 3 of the tracks, but Paul played bass on the rest of them. He's joined the band now as the sixth member. He brings an enthusiasm and new energy to the band that's revitalized all of us. Not that we needed revitalization, but it's always great to have new energy. And he's also an old friend. He went to school with Patter and Gary. He's played in bands with them before. He's a bit of a goofy goofster. And it also, having him on bass, gave Emma the opportunity to focus a lot more on vocals and keys. On this album in particular, we wanted Emma's singing to feature on as many songs as possible, and there's a lot of harmonies and vocal layering and bouncing off singing between myself and Emma, or Emma and Cillian. So now, after recording the bass and drums, we move on to the biggest bulk of our recording, which is the guitars. And the guitar recording usually takes up about 50 to maybe even more, 60-70% of the studio time, because people who see us live will see that we have 3 guitars playing at the same time. These are the amps that we used. I think there's also we also use a Fender Deluxe that's not in that shot. We use a lot of the Vox into Fender and the Sound City into the Jazzmaster, and Telly is great for lead parts and gives the songs a real sharp bite.
Say magnifique.
King Cruel. Patter being a little funny jokester in the studio. In terms of guitars, there's Jazz Masters, there's Gibson, there's a 12-string electric. We also have some acoustic. There's, I think, every type of Fender. We also have a Tele on it, and we have a Strat. And it's actually the Seagulls' favorite part of the studio process too. They just love the guitars. Now let's hear a few of the clips from studio. That's the Seagull approving this solo. Often how we record is we'll layer guitars over and over each other. It's the same with the writing process and demos. We'll have, anywhere from 6 to 12 guitar tracks, and we just strip it back and keep the best sounds. In the outro to No Rivers, here's us recording it. You can get an idea of how many guitar tracks there are. Here's a few clips. I had an idea to add belly claps at the end of that song, but it was vetoed. It's probably a bit too much time in the studio. We also recorded the album shortly after my wedding. I married an Algerian woman. So Keelan made me a cool shirt with an Algerian and Irish flag. And the great thing about recording this album across just about 3 weeks is it gave us more room for experimentation, dropping, kind of putting different instruments down, messing around with production. So we tried the harmonica. There's also a harmonium in the studio, which is really great. We're a big fan of the harmonium. My piano teacher growing up had a few harmoniums in her room. So yeah, it's a dream to own one. Also a big fan of Penguin Cafe Orchestra, who have some great tracks with harmoniums on them. The harmonium features in Songs About Divide, and hopefully on the next album we'll have even more harmonium features. One of the highlights of the album actually was, for myself and my brother, was being able to get my dad onto it. My brother and I owe a huge amount to my dad in terms of our music taste, and we grew up with him messing around on the clarinet. So we actually wrote some clarinet parts for him in Something I Know. And in the end we ended up keeping the parts that were actually improvised in the studio, which is kind of like these long drone sounds. Here's Dad naming all the Beatles. This is Isha's violin. She's one of Gary's best friends. The artist who designed the records is one of our best friends from home as well. And a big part of Silverbacks is we've been lucky in that we've never had to look beyond our friendship groups to get people in, which means it's a real family feel, and it's unlikely that we'll grow tired of each other at this stage, which means Silverbacks should be here for a long time. And then most importantly, we got a lot of piano down on this album. The piano is actually the first instrument that Keelan, myself, and Emma learned before we got into guitars. And so here's a few clips from Hideaway where the piano and violins come together. And there's some nice mellotrons in the outro to this song actually. Overall, we love recording music, and just want to say a big thank you to everyone who buys our records and vinyls and comes to our shows. We're firstly writing and putting out these albums for ourselves, but it's always an extra plus when other people seem to enjoy it, and the more that happens, the more fuel and energy it gives us to continue to put out albums. So a big thank you to everyone. And of course, a massive thank you to the Seagulls of Sonic Studios for their critique and valuable feedback during this recording process.